You set foot on foreign soil. Only this land isn't ruled by any country or government. In this land we celebrate music. In this land we celebrate games. In this land we celebrate those who compose video game music. Welcome to the VGMbassy. Welcome and thanks for tuning in to another episode of the VGMbassy. This is a show centered around video game music and the amazing online community of fans and podcasters that enjoy it. My name's Ed, and on each episode I'll take the role of Prime VGM Minister and invite a guest VG Ambassador onto the show to share with us their own video game music culture. Or I may share a part of my culture on a solo show. Ladies and gents, this is a show that is a long time coming. Actually, I have a first-time VG Ambassador with me, but he's no stranger to VGM podcasts and or the microphone. I've got Professor Tom from Shujin VGM Academy with me tonight, and I'm excited to play some really, really cool VGM. How are you, Tom? Welcome to the show.
I'm great. Thank you for having me, Ed. It's nice to be here.
Yeah, I've listened to your show quite a bit. It's a really cool format, and you share a lot of really good tunes. When we talked about getting together to make a show, you had mentioned that you had done a show in the past and kind of want to revisit that topic, and we thought it would be a really good topic for this one. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your show and what we're talking about today?
All right, so Shujin Academy VGM Club is my show, and it tends to be a bunch of big blocks of music that are all centered around some kind of theme or another. Often it's a mood, but sometimes it's like a specific concept, or it can be anything I want it to be. It's flexible.
It's the nice thing about being a solo show operator, too.
Yeah. Sometimes I do history episodes where I'll talk about like one thing in video gaming as viewed through the lens of VGM. The second episode of my show was all about these cool old Sega deluxe arcade cabinets that, you know, not just the cockpit machines, but the ones that were like beyond the cockpit machines, where they'd move and they had all kinds of crazy adjustable seats, and the cabinets had all this cool, crazy styling, like the Outrun cabinet that actually looked like a Lamborghini, or the Galaxy Force 2 cabinet that would tilt you left or right as you moved on your stick. And I thought it would be a good idea to revisit some Sega arcade games for this episode, since it's been on my list of things to come back and revisit since literally episode 2.
No, that's cool. I mean, I remember the old R360. They used to have one at a local arcade, and that was the one that would tilt you upside down, and it was just a big sphere and would just rotate on 3 different axes.
Oh my gosh, really?
Absolutely. I don't think I ever played it because I was scared to get in it, but I would watch people go in it. And oh my god, it just looked sickening. I don't know how people could actually rotate upside down and left and right and still manage to play a video game successfully. It just felt out of this world, literally.
Those things are so cool. I've never actually seen one. Like, I wish I could, like, you know, go play one. They're super rare these days.
Oh, sure.
It's like one of those things that, like, they just don't exist. It's like finding a Galaxian theater cabinet. Yeah,
exactly. And I actually played one of those at a hotel in Las Vegas. So I guess I'm hitting all the rare arcade cabinets here. That's pretty cool.
I feel incredibly lucky that I found one at a Dave & Buster's when I was visiting Atlanta, and I like saw it and I was like, I know what this is. I have to play it. And that was like 20 years ago. And, you know, now there are definitely none of them. They're all in landfills, which is really tragic.
Yeah, they just took up too much real estate, I think, to be practical for a lot of places like that. But today we are, I guess, scaling down a little bit. We're showing off some music from some Sega arcade games that don't necessarily have freaky deluxe cabinets, and we're looking at more like the standard fare. There's going to be looks like a lot of late 80s and early 90s stuff on our list. A lot of really, really good FM jams. So if you're into that stuff, this is the show for you.
There's a couple of interesting cabinet curiosities here, but yeah. I like the FM jams. FM jams are great.
Absolutely. I'm a huge fan of them myself. And speaking of some curiosities, you mentioned, I think you mentioned this game just a couple of minutes ago, tilting left and right and up and down. Mm-hmm. What's the first game we got on our list tonight?
So the song we're going to be going into is Take Back Scene C from Galaxy Force 2.
Nice. This was released in 1988, composed by Katsuhiro Hayashi and Koichi Namiki. Be right back.
Alright, that was Take Back Scene C, Level 3, from Galaxy Force 2, composed by Katsuhiro Hayashi. And man, that song is so funky and so cool. There's all the crazy synths and all the crazy bass and all those crazy solos. And I love this soundtrack. This is peak Sega. This and Outrun, like, that's Sega in the 80s. That's what the arcade sounded like. It's so great.
Yeah, Sega really just leaned so hard into their jazz and their funk and just these nice, breezy songs. Like, I could expect a tune like this to fit in really well on a like an Outrun style game like you're talking about. This music is kind of a fish out of water when you look at the game itself, because the game is this frenetic, super scalar, like behind the ship, crazy ass, spaceship shooting game, and you've got these jazzy tunes in the background.
Yeah, it doesn't necessarily fit the game, but it actually does. It sounds so good, I just don't even care. It's kind of like the Thunderblade soundtrack. The Thunderblade soundtrack's a little similar. Mm-hmm. Like, it's also got that vibe, which doesn't fit with, helicopter shooter, but I don't even care. This is so good.
Yeah, it's funny because Thunderblade was also a Katsuhiro Hayashi soundtrack as well, so, you know, he might have been like the Japanese Tim Fallon, where he just didn't really care what the game was. He's like, I'm going to compose some bang-ass tunes, and I'm just going to put them in the game, and everyone's going to be happy anyway, so.
I certainly am. I mean,
yeah.
If I was working at Sega and Hayashi turned this in for me, I would have been like, you know, Hayashi, this is not really Galaxy Force, but it is great, so we're just going to ship it.
Yeah, exactly. No one is going to complain, and if they do, we're just going to call them crazy, because listen to that solo right there.
It's a noisy arcade. People aren't even going to pay attention to the music.
And that's the thing, and I think you mentioned that some of these deluxe Galaxy Force 2 cabinets actually had headphone jacks on them?
That's right, yeah, the crazy deluxe cabinets. There was a regular cabinet that was just a stand-up, and then there was a regular cockpit cabinet, and then there was the deluxe one, which was like 6 feet wide, and you'd sit in it, and it actually moved with you as you moved your ship. It like rotated, and it tilted and pitched, and such a cool concept. So like awesomely Sega. That's why arcades died, because people, you know, could just play the games at home now, but back then, you actually got to go on a ride. They should bring that back.
Yeah.
Sega, please, bring it back.
Yeah, I mean, those games are few and far between now. There are some of those games where you can actually sit in, but they're normally like the light gun games where you just kind of sit on a seat and then shoot at the screen.
Yeah.
Or whatever. The deluxe cabinets are just not a thing anymore, and it's quite a shame.
Yeah, there was the Star Wars Battle Pod a few years ago, and that was cool.
Oh, yeah, that's right. That was the one with the big, like, concave screen.
Yeah.
I remember that. That was super cool.
Yeah, that thing's cool.
Yeah, that kind of had Galaxy Force 2 vibes, for sure. I think that's probably the most modern analog you can get to this game in terms of its presentation.
I think so, yeah.
But one thing that we've caught up with is VGM in the mainstream. Back then, you know, Galaxy Force 2 and Thunderblade, both of which were Katsuhiro Hayashi productions, they were available on one soundtrack. Mm-hmm. So, as we were talking while we were listening to the music, you were saying that this is like a nearly 3-minute long song before it even loops, and the stages are not that long. So I was like, oh, well, they probably have some sort of a CD or something where you can listen to it, you know, by itself.
Yeah, they do.
And we were talking about, you know, Thunderblade and how that music didn't really fit the game. And it's funny because Galaxy Force 2 and Thunderblade shared a retail CD release with both soundtracks on it at once. So
it is on Spotify. You can go listen to it on Spotify, believe it or don't.
Oh, that's awesome. That's very cool. So I wonder if he composed them around the same time. I'm not as familiar with the Thunderblade soundtrack. Does it have similar vibes to Galaxy Force?
Yeah, it has some similar vibes, and it also kind of had a crazy cabinet because it looked like a helicopter. Like it literally looked like a helicopter that you'd sit in, and you know you actually had the stick between your legs like you would in a real helicopter to move it around. They had one in the arcade by my house when I was a kid. Good times.
That is absolutely amazing. They did so much crazy stuff with their arcade hardware. Those were the days. The sound chip that this music runs on is the YM2151, which is in just a ton of arcade hardware all over the place. It was also the same chip that was in the Sharp X68000. They also had the standard Sega PCM chip along there as well. I think that was mainly for the sound effects and stuff because the song doesn't sound like it has any sampled percussion or anything like that. So I think it was just kind of running off of that YM2151 chip, which is good.
I'm going to take your word for it because I don't know sound chips. I know that they exist.
Then you can leave all that stuff to me.
Yeah. You know so much more than I do. I'm just going to let you go with it. It's cool to hear you talk. It's like the host of VG Emporium also does that. And when I was on his show, he got to talk about sound chips. And it's cool to hear y'all talk about them, even if it's something that I'll eventually retain it, like, you know, after I've been doing VGM podcasting for, 25 years. It's like how I retain pro wrestling knowledge. I know all about pro wrestling.
Right. It's all practical knowledge stuff. Yeah, I got really into the sound chips and what they did and how they did their stuff pretty early on, especially when I was ripping a lot of video game music for proliferation around the internet. Knowing what the chips were and what they did kind of helped you get a better quality piece of audio out there to share on the internet.
And thank you for doing that. A lot of the songs I have played on my show came from you.
Oh, that's awesome. That is really cool. Yeah, I had a lot of fun over a couple years span, just doing thousands and thousands of VGM songs in MP3 form. And I still do a little bit here and there on my Discord. I take some requests now and again, but I'm glad they found a home, and I'm glad that people are using them for forces of good.
You have done a couple for me on Discord, and thank you very much for that. That's really cool.
No problem at all. My pleasure. Speaking of which, if there's any soundtracks that we play today that folks want to hear the entire soundtrack and I don't have it in my collection on Discord, feel free to post on the Discord and I'll make you guys a full soundtrack. And you can listen to your heart's content. All right, so let's move on to our next game. My first pick of the show is a track called Dave. And this one is from a game called Holosseum, released in 1992 exclusively in the arcades. And this was composed by Kazuhiko Nagai. We'll be right back. Alright, welcome back. That was Dave from the game Holosseum, released in the arcade in 1992, composed by Kazuhiko Nagai.
Dave.
This was a track that I wasn't too keen on at the beginning, but I think the B section really gets very kind of funky, and those horns come in, and it just by the end of the song, I'm totally grooving to this track, where at the beginning I was a little iffy on it. What was your impression of it?
I was all there. Right from the beginning, I was like, this is so cool. And it's not what I was expecting, because if this is the game I'm thinking of, I was absolutely not expecting a song like this. This is from Holosseum, which I think is one of the 2 games on the Sega hologram cabinet.
Yeah.
Isn't that right?
Exactly.
Are they both Laserdisc games, or is that just Time Traveler?
So yeah, just Time Traveler. That was the Laserdisc game.
Okay.
And then they discovered that the Laserdisc drive in the cabinet was kind of flaky and didn't work very well.
Like Laserdiscs tend to be.
Yeah, so they released this Holosseum game on a board. I guess you just unplug the Laserdisc drive and you plug in this board. And this would play more like a traditional arcade game off of chips on a silicon board and was much more reliable. And the whole reason behind that was that Sega was trying to really push this hologram cabinet because it was super expensive.
I have seen this. They had this at the arcade when I was a kid.
Yeah, me too.
They had Time Traveler, and it was super cool. It played like absolute garbage because I hate Laserdisc games, but it looked cool as hell.
Yeah. Yeah, Time Traveler was kind of a, I don't know, like a watered-down Dragon's Lair, I guess is the best way you can kind of describe it.
Yeah, it kind of was. And they were also trying, it was, Generation 1 gaming in a lot of respects because they had never made a hologram game before.
Right.
At least not one that got wide release. And so they weren't quite sure what it would be like and what would sell. And it looked so cool. Played like garbage, looked cool.
Right. And then Holosseum was more of a it was a traditional one-on-one fighting game with actual sprites. Mm-hmm. So you got that cool effect of the holographic display, but then you also got a genuinely decent game to play alongside it. It was kind of like a Street Fighter clone. There was 4 characters you could choose from. Fight against each other, special moves. I think it was only 2 or 3 buttons, so like an attack and a jump.
I can't believe one of the guys was named Dave.
Dave, yep. So he was the, token American, and they had a couple of other national fighters with, I think there was four fighters with 4 different types of martial arts, and they would fight against each other. But the whole thing was pretty cool. It would project the game off of a regular monitor, but it would project it at a reflective concave mirror. And so the way it reflected off the mirror made it look like the graphics were kind of standing up in the middle of this Holosseum. It was kind of like this little stage in this arcade cabinet.
Yeah, it was like this big stage, and you felt like you could reach out and touch the sprites, only they weren't real, so you couldn't. But oh my god, it was such a cool thing. I'm glad we played this. This is another great Sega gimmick.
Yep, it's a great kind of blast from the past, I think, because these cabinets are all but forgotten.
Yeah, and this is not something that you could bring home. Like, this is not a game you can translate to a home console. Not really.
Right. I mean, you could play this in MAME, and it's okay. You know, in the actual game itself, in the arcade cabinet, it looks holographic because there's like reflections on the bottom, and it looks like they're actually kind of standing on this platform. But when you play the ROM, you realize that the reflections are actually just part of the sprites. They're pre-programmed in. So there's no reflective surface on the bottom whatsoever. It's all an illusion, and it's a really, really good illusion. I think they did a really good job. I just don't think the quality of the games was good enough that arcade owners were getting the quarters. You know, I think people would like pass by it and kind of see like the demo play and say, oh, this is really cool, but this doesn't look like a game that I necessarily want to play. I just kind of want to marvel at the technology and then kind of move on and put my quarters in Street Fighter or something like that.
If I'm remembering it right, it was also like the cabinet itself was kind of squat and boxy, and like you'd see it, but also it had like a roof over it so that it, you know, a bunch of overhead lighting didn't get involved and mess up the reflection. So it wasn't as flashy as some of the other cabinets were. Like if you walked by the Galaxy Force 2 Deluxe cabinet, you could see the thing moving and tilting, and it was already gigantic. It was like the size of somebody's dinner table. So you would be like, oh, what is that thing? Yeah. But, you know, if you walked past the Sega hologram cabinet, you would be like, that's a white box with a kind of a black mouth type of a thing. I don't get it.
Right.
You'd have to...
Kind of like a garbage bin, almost.
Yeah, you'd have to look at it for a minute to actually, like, get it. And that's probably part of why it didn't do very well.
Yeah, and you have to look at it dead on, too, because if you are at an angle, the picture would warp because of the concave reflective. So you'd end up with kind of like this very skewed version of what the game looked like until you kind of moved to the middle of it and viewed it from a proper angle.
Like the 3D on the 3DS, where like, I love my 3DS. I played so many games on it. I turned on the 3D twice.
See, I was always on a 3D kick with that, so... But yeah, you can't really play with somebody else with the 3D on, because if they would see double or triple, you know, weird artifacts of graphics. It just doesn't hold the illusion like it does if you're sitting right in front of it. That kind of got me thinking is, what if you had two players playing the holographic game, playing Holosseum, but then on the other side you had a larger version of that stage with another holographic theater, maybe even almost like life-size, and then the other people could gather on the other side and then see the holograms fighting against each other. I mean, super, super expensive, but that would be awesome.
Yeah, that would have brought some people. That's going back to Galaxian Theater, or that, like, the Ridge Racer full immersion cabinet that they made that was, like, the size of a car, and, like, you would have only had, like, you know, a few hundred of them made, but they would have been the coolest things you'd ever seen in your life.
Exactly. One of those experiences that you don't ever forget. Just like this one, I still remember when and where I saw my first holographic game. I think it was Time Traveler. I don't know if I ever got to see a Holosseum in action, but I definitely saw Time Traveler.
I saw Time Traveler. They had it for a little while at the arcade near where I live, and probably they had it until the Laserdisc broke, because Laserdiscs are so flaky.
Yep.
Then they got rid of it, and I never saw it again. No idea what happened to it.
Now you can only see it in, people that have restored them or playing a ROM dump in MAME.
Yeah, and it's not quite the same.
Exactly. All right, sir, let us move on to our next track. What's next on your list?
All right, moving onward. I believe our next track is Genesis Causing Brave Men's Theme. That's a long title.
It is.
It's also weird because there's like the little like tilde on the opposite sides of causing, and then Brave Men's Theme is in quotation marks. But yeah, this is the first level track from Gain Ground, so let's go into it.
Sweet.
And welcome back. That was Genesis causing Brave Men's theme from Gain Ground, composed by Katsuhiro Hayashi. This is kind of a Hayashi showcase episode, actually.
Yeah, there's a lot of mainstays, I think, in the Sega arcade music composition house around this time, so we're going to hear a lot of names over and over again. I think it's kind of funny because the title of the song sounds like that Genesis is causing the Brave Men's theme.
Yeah, I know this is the first level of the game, and I have read up on this game only because, like, if you just try to play it, it kind of makes no sense. Are you familiar with this?
I am. I'm more familiar with the Genesis version of the game than the arcade version.
You've kind of played the arcade game. It's a pretty good port. The arcade port was the monitor is vertically oriented instead of horizontally, like a television.
Yep.
And the graphics are a little better because it's an arcade board instead of a Genesis. But it's pretty much the same game. And anyone who's not familiar with it, it's like this crazy there's like a bunch of characters and you have to move them through the level to a goal, and there's a bunch of people shooting at you while you're doing it, and you can shoot back, but every character is different and they have a different main weapon and a different sub weapon, and there's some really odd combinations. Like there's like a Viking who's got a bow, and there's a warrior who has a spear.
Yep.
And there's like an American guy with a gun and a grenade, and an American girl with like a gun and a sniper rifle, and at some point there are wizards and ninjas too. It's really cool. I love it. All the characters move really slow too, which adds a different element to it.
Right, and I think Gain Ground is really kind of like apropos of the game, because it really feels like that's what you're trying to do. You're just trying to slowly work your way through these enemies rather than, go through them guns blazing like you're in like Metal Slug or Contra or something like that.
Yeah, it's like playing rugby instead of playing football.
Yeah, right, exactly. It's for people who like action games but are also very patient at the same time, which is not always a combination a lot of people have.
No, it's not. Those are two things that don't always go together.
Yeah.
But this is a good mix of them. I like this game.
Yeah, it's a good game. It's got really, like, a lot of hardcore fans around. And I seem to remember that Utopia Nemo was a fan of either the game or the soundtrack. I think he shared something from it on one of my previous shows.
I like them both.
Yeah, this one uses a that same YM2151 chip. And it's cool because there's an exact duplicate of this song on the Genesis/Mega Drive version. But because the sound chip in the Genesis is a little more powerful, it's in stereo, and there's a couple more effects on the synths and stuff. But this is cool because it really kind of distills the melody into a much more simple package. And it's still a really good tune. Like that, the melody in the song is so strong that it really stands out regardless of what kind of FM sound chip you're playing it on. And I really like that about it.
When I first started listening to VGM, and I was looking for soundtracks to download, my rule was that I thought about video games that I had played where the melodies or something else in the songs had stuck with me, despite the fact that I hadn't picked up the game in 15 years. And this is one of them. Like, this track is good. It's got that cool, like, rousing melody, and it's got the cool, like, snare bits.
Yeah, and it sounds triumphant, and even though the game is kind of slow, the song is... I think it's got enough lift to it that it makes it feel like even those couple of inches you may get up the screen while you're trying to dispatch all your enemies, it still feels like those inches were successful and glorious inches, you know what I mean?
It's really the way it uses the 17th Lydian mode and also the minor F chords.
I'll take your word for it.
Oh no, I made all of that up. I know nothing about music theory.
I'm like, we're taking a detour into Super Marcato Brothers territory.
Yeah, the only stuff I know about music theory is from listening to the Marcato Bros, and then I can pick up some of the lingo, but I still don't really know what they're talking about. I think it's so cool, though.
Kind of like knowing the language enough to speak it, but not enough to, like, write it down.
Yeah. The Marcato Bros are, like, doing this very detailed music theory analysis of songs, and then on my show I'm like, it's got a good beat, and you can dance to it. Yeah.
Yeah, but you know what? I think that's why there's room for so many different types of people in the VGM podcast scene. We've all got our own, I guess you can call them gimmicks, but we've all got our own strengths, and we've all got our own kind of ways to present the music to people. And
Yeah, and I think it's awesome. Everybody should start their own VGM podcast.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely everyone. There should be 8 billion of them.
Just saturate the market even further. That's great.
Ed and I have too many listeners. So, I just bought a Ferrari with all the money from my Patreon.
Oh, yeah. Patreon's just... The IRS is knocking on my door because they think I'm laundering money at this point.
Yeah. I don't even have a Patreon.
Anyways, yeah, so Gain Ground, great game. Definitely check out the rest of the soundtrack, because if you like this one, you'll hear more like it on the rest of it. Katsuhiro Hayashi knocks it out of the park. Ready to move on to our next one?
Sure.
All right, so we're going to play a track called Desert Storm. This was on Arabian Fight, released again in 1992. This one was composed by a newcomer to the show, Toru Nakabayashi, and this was a Yu Suzuki-produced game, so it definitely has some quality pedigree behind it. Let's take a listen. All right, that was Desert Storm from Arabian Fight, released in 1992 in the arcades, composed by Toru Nakabayashi. And, at least once per show, I've got to pick the most industrial track I could find and throw it in. So that's this one. I love the really aggressive percussion in this one. And even though it obviously has some Arabian flair to it, I feel like it's got just this like really hard electronic rock groove as well, with those really staccato kind of notes punctuated with that really heavy sampled percussion.
It's such a cool mix of sounds. Like, I am not familiar with Arabian Fight. My familiarity with Arabian Fight is that I've seen it scrolling through games in MAME, and I've never even played it. But it's got this has such a cool sound to it. It's a great mixture of the traditional Arabian noises with the sitar and the bongos, and then combined with these interesting rock bits with the drums and the bumps. I'm not sure what instrument Nakabayashi is synthesizing with those FMs, but this is cool as hell.
Yeah, it just kind of immediately grabbed me when I was kind of picking through the songs on this soundtrack, and I just fell in love with it, and I kind of just listened to it on repeat while I was working right after I discovered it, and didn't get tired of it, and that's always the mark of a very good track in my opinion.
Yeah, so what is this game?
So it's basically a side-scrolling beat-em-up.
Okay.
It runs on the System 32 hardware, which we've got another game coming up very soon that runs on the same hardware, and we'll kind of, maybe talk a little bit more about what the hardware is capable of. But it's like a souped-up Genesis with some really powerful scaling capabilities.
Yeah, it's interesting because this does not sound like Radmobile, which is the first System 32 game I think of, or the other game we've got coming up, which is not Radmobile.
Yeah, well, I think that's because the theme of this is not, it's got a more exotic kind of Arabian theme to it, obviously, called Arabian Fight. You are, I think you can pick between 3 or 4 Arabian fighters, and it's a side-scrolling beat-em-up.
Looks like it's a 4-player game.
Yeah, that's probably it. I think they had 2-player cabinets and 4-player cabinets, and I always, like when I'm playing in MAME, I always prefer the 2-player cabinet because then you can pick which character you want to be, kind of like the Ninja Turtles stuff.
Yeah.
But it uses, like I said, some pretty powerful scaling hardware built into the system, so as your character gets, further down the screen, which is closer to you, the characters will scale in and out, and some enemies that you're fighting would actually appear as like a full shaded like anime piece of artwork on the side of the screen, and then kind of turn into a sprite and jump in and join the fight. So there's like a lot of foreground action going on. There's a lot of really dynamic playing with the depth of field in this game, which I thought was super, super cool.
That does sound like Yu Suzuki.
Yeah, definitely. And especially for an arcade game, you want to throw in that flash, but also make it playable as well.
Yeah, you always have to have the flash in the arcade games because you only have a couple minutes in the arcade to really impress people.
Yeah.
And you're sitting there next to everything else, which is already going, blah,
Exactly.
Pay attention to me, blah.
Right. And what's going to scream the loudest, basically.
Yeah, I'm hearing about the scaling kind of makes me think of Art of Fighting, where they did that. They also would do that. Like, as the fighters got together, they'd scale in, and as they went farther out, they'd zoom out.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is not something SNK did for other fighters. They did it in King of Fighters 12, but it was a bad idea. KOF 12 is bad.
Yeah, and a lot of the Neo Geo games, like the Samurai Showdown games, they would use that capability to zoom in the screen and zoom out the screen rather than the characters themselves becoming bigger. So they, very, very kind of similar technology there. As far as sound goes, this board used 2 YM3438 chips. So the YM3438 is basically like a slightly enhanced version of the YM2612, which is the one in the Sega Genesis. So it's using 2 Sega Genesis chips working together, as well as the RF5C68 sampler, which I think was the one that was in the Sega CD. So now you've got this really, really powerful, like 12 channels of FM blasting at the same time, as well as this really powerful sampler chip. So that's, I think, why these songs sound so good. It's cool that they're able to make such rich FM compositions with all the sampled percussion, but then when you're fighting in this game, there's also lots of vocalizations, and the characters are shouting, and you've got, sampled sword clashes when their scimitars are like, rubbing against each other and stuff, so...
Yeah, once again, you want that flash. You want all the flash.
Exactly, whether it's audio or whether it's video. A lot of people get this confused with another game called Arabian Magic, which was a 4-player side-scrolling Arabian beat-em-up released almost exactly the same time by Taito. So,
yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, folks get really mixed up between the two of them. The character's a little smaller on the screen on the Taito game, and it's a little less flashy. Between the two, I think Arabian Fight is my favorite of them. But it's cool to check them both out and kind of compare and contrast.
I'm going to have to go fire up MAME after we get off and check this out.
Yeah, definitely do that, because I think you'd really enjoy that one. Or you'd really enjoy both of them, to be honest with you.
I love a good beat-em-up.
Same here. It's one of my favorite genres.
Glad we've actually seen a miniature beat-em-up resurgence with River City Girls and Fight and Rage and Streets of Rage 4.
Ninja Turtles.
Final
Vendetta. There's just been a ton of really cool ones coming out lately.
Yeah, I'm glad. The world needs more beat-em-ups.
Exactly.
Not like a million beat-em-ups, but at least a handful.
As long as they're good quality.
Yeah. Quality is always better than quantity. Like, I don't need any more mediocre first-person shooters.
Right, exactly. We have flooded the market on that for sure. But, I hope that maybe with this resurgence of beat-em-ups, companies like Sega and Konami will take a look at their rosters of beat-em-ups they had in the past and say, hey, maybe we can make sequels, maybe we can make enhancements, bring these out.
Maybe we can at least, maybe we can even just re-release them, as they were.
Sure.
So people can experience them. Like, I'm pretty sure we got a game coming up that I don't think has ever gotten a home release. I'm not sure. I don't think Arabian Fight ever got a home release.
I don't think so. I think most of the System 32 library did not get home releases. Radmobile did not come out on Saturn, did it?
Radmobile had a Saturn port.
Did it? Was it Japan only?
It was Japan only, and I think it actually didn't. It wasn't named Radmobile. It was named something else.
Oh, okay. Maybe that's why when I'm looking through Saturn lists, I don't see it.
Yeah, I think I know that because I was doing research on Radmobile because I played a bunch of songs from it on episode 2 of my show.
Gotcha. When
I was playing the crazy arcade hardware games because the Radmobile arcade cabinet was crazy.
Yes, I remember that too. It looked like a little car. It looked like one of those little ride-on things that you could sit in.
Yeah, it was kind of like a go-kart.
Yeah.
Had a button for windshield wipers because that's a thing you do in the game.
Oh, Sega, you're crazy. Speaking of crazy, let's move on to our next track. What you got for us?
All right, this is a crazy track. It's called Hot Snow, which is definitely a thing that you experience all the time.
Sure.
Maybe if you're living next to a nuclear meltdown and there was a big explosion and there's stuff raining on you. But that's unfortunate. Yep. Yeah, this is Hot Snow, round 5, from Fantasy Zone. And this is the Japanese version, not the American version, because they are slightly different. Welcome back. That was Hot Snow, Round 5, Japanese version from Fantasy Zone, composed by Hiroshi Kawaguchi. I don't know about you, Ed. I don't know if you were paying attention. We're on a video call, and I was sitting there bouncing back and forth, big ol' smile on my face. I can't hear this song and not be cheered.
Oh, I think your camera's still off, so all I see is your little icon there.
Oh, well.
But I was bouncing around too, so you probably saw me doing it.
I did. I certainly did. I am quite fond of this. I can't hear this song and not be like, you just gotta smile when you hear this. It's so infectious and so perky and happy and upbeat, and oh my god, even the bass line has this happy bounce to it. Like, it is happy all the way down. Absolutely.
I mean, Hiroshi Kawaguchi knows his way around island beats and just songs that make you feel like you're sitting by the pool. Very KVGM vibes, for sure. And this game, Outrun's got that feel. Of course, he composed the music for that as well. But this game also does too, even though it's a spaceship shooter, which earlier we were talking about with Galaxy Force 2, that kind of music doesn't belong. This one has those vibrant colors and that kind of cartoony look.
Music like that does belong to Fantasy Zone, because Fantasy Zone is not the typical, oh, you're a badass warrior flying a spaceship into the alien armada that's going to destroy Earth. Fantasy Zone is like bright and cheerful and colorful.
Yep.
It's, like Twinbee, they're the two initial pillars of the cute-em-up genre, subgenre or sub-subgenre.
Yeah.
Wherever you put it on the genre chart.
Yeah, exactly. I kind of equate this and Twinbee together as the cute-em-ups, and then Parodius and all that stuff. It's all, if you're familiar with any one of those, you kind of get the vibe that these games are going for.
Yeah, it's like how if you've played Life Force and Gradius, then you understand what Zero Wing and Truxton and a lot of those other games are what they feel like and what the art direction is like, even if you don't necessarily, understand the exact intricacies of the differences between Thunder Force and Truxton and Gradius. And I'm sure my buddy Tori, who loves bullet hell shooters and who does listen to my show, is like yelling at the speaker right now because he loves him some shooters.
Yeah, and I think, it's the more into a genre you get, it's like being a wine taster. Sometimes it's just like, oh, this is red wine and this is white wine. But then when you get into those intricacies, you might look at Truxton and Gradius and say, no, they're entirely different. But to the layman, well, yeah, they're side-scrolling shooters. What do you want?
There's a spaceship, and yeah, it's like I can start to get into I've played a lot of fighting games, so I can kind of get into some of the differences between King of Fighters and Street Fighter and Tekken and Virtua Fighter, and to like my kids who are, they don't really like fighting games. They're just like, there's two karate dudes, they're punching each other.
Exactly.
What, Dad?
There's a yellow bar that turns red when they get hit, and when it turns fully red, they die.
Yeah. And I'm like, no, you don't understand. There's double alpha dream cancels in this one.
Exactly. Yep, but cute-em-ups, I don't think that they're that... it's not a huge genre. I think there's probably maybe under a dozen cute-em-ups out there that have any sort of popularity.
Yeah, there's Fantasy Zone and Twinbee and Parodius, and I guess you can kind of throw Death Smiles maybe in there. Yeah. Because it's got that Lolita vibe, and there's... I'm trying to think of the name of the series. Choaniki. There's the Choaniki games. The Choaniki games kind of have this like weird off-kilter cute-em-up vibe. Yeah. Like, it's like a bizarro cute-em-up. Not that Choaniki is an incredibly sensitive series.
No.
Despite the fact that I think actually there's a lot of gay guys who like it.
Yeah, Choaniki is one of those games where you know the vibe as soon as you play level 1. You're like, yeah, okay. And, yeah, you might consider that cute. Who knows?
I'm so glad that Choaniki exists. Like, it's such a cool concept.
Yeah.
Why not have these crazy muscled dudes shooting at each other?
I agree, and I think, shmups is a genre that, on the whole, takes itself a little too seriously, so having these kind of outliers with the cute-em-ups and Choaniki and stuff like that, kind of like games that poke fun at the genre a little bit, kind of gives it a little bit more personality. So I really appreciate that. And just like any other game, there's cute beat-em-up games, and there's cute fighters, and so they all have their places.
I don't think there's any cute first-person shooters.
There was Chex Quest, the Doom mod, made entirely out of Chex characters. Yeah.
And there's that one Call of Duty year where they just decided to have everybody shoot water guns at each other, and everybody was a clown. And no, I'm making that up.
That sounds kind of like a post-Columbine decision or something like that. But, anyways, moving on. So Fantasy Zone, have you played a lot of this game at all?
I love Fantasy Zone. Fantasy Zone is great. It's so adorable, and it's so much fun. And it has a cool mechanic for a side-scrolling shooter because, in the normal side-scrolling shooter, you're always going left to right, but in Fantasy Zone, you actually can go left to right or right to left. You turn when your spaceship turns, and it's like the world is a cylinder that you have to finish, and then at the end of the cylinder, it turns into a normal side-scroller for a boss fight.
Right. It kind of apes off of the, I think it's Defender was the first game that really did that.
Yeah, Defender does that. It also has an item shop, which is very unusual for a shooter.
Yeah. Yeah, because your character in Fantasy Zone is an actual living being, right? It's a ship, but it's also got...
Yeah, it's an adorable living spaceship with wings.
Yeah.
And, the wings flap as you move around. And if you get too close to the ground, instead of blowing up, your ship just sprouts legs and runs.
Right. So they definitely have some lore going on there. And tons of different versions, like AM2 completely rebuilt Fantasy Zone from the ground up for the 3DS for a completely 3D version of Fantasy Zone. they've created versions of Fantasy Zone for fantasy arcade hardware, where like they wanted to create a new version, like Fantasy Zone DX or something it was called. But they built, kind of similar to like the Pico 8, they designed an arcade board that it would run on, and then designed the game to the specifications and limitations of that arcade board. So Sega just loves to play with this game and do fun things with it.
Opa Opa was kind of the first Sega mascot.
Yep.
Like, I think it was Opa Opa and Alex Kidd, and they had a knife fight to see who would eventually win, and then Sonic curb stomped them.
Yeah, from the ashes of the Master System, I think, for a little while you had the Altered Beast guys, until Sonic showed up, and then it was all over after that.
Yeah, I'm firmly in Opa Opa's camp over Alex Kidd and the Altered Beast guys.
I mean, he's faster than all of them, so when it comes to Sega, it's all about the speed, so...
Sonic definitely beats everybody, though. Sonic is the most marketable of everyone we've mentioned.
For sure.
I do want to mention one more bit of Fantasy Zone trivia. The shop theme is actually reused in Turbo Outrun.
Oh.
Not even changed. It's the same song. It's such a weird little interesting bit of trivia.
Interesting. I think that was probably also Kawaguchi, right? Because he did the original Outrun.
Yeah.
Interesting. I wonder if it was a last minute, oh my god, we forgot to put music for this area. Here, I've got this.
It wouldn't surprise me.
The last minute edition.
Budgets were low.
Yeah, that's pretty neat. So let's move on to our next one. We're going to chill things down a little bit and play some golf music for a change. It's been a while since I've featured any golf tunes on the show.
I love golf tunes.
I do too. I love golf video games. I love mini golf in real life. VGM Jukebox back in the day, and still a love of FM-based golf music in my heart. So let's listen to Main BGM 2 from Dynamic Country Club. This was released in 1991 exclusively in arcades, composed by a composer only known as M.A. Main BGM 2 from Dynamic Country Club, released in the arcade in 1991, composed by M.A. And I failed to mention that Toru Nakabayashi was also a composer on this as well. Also, an immediate correction from a mistake I made. I did say this was exclusively an arcade game. However, I completely forgot that this was also released on the Sega CD, and the rip of the Sega CD version of this game was nowhere to be found, so I actually logged a VGM of this Sega CD version, which I think was a completely different soundtrack, but Josh Adachi over at VGM Jukebox back when they were running was a huge fan of the soundtrack for this game, so I did rip a copy and provide that to him. So that's why this title, I guess, sounded familiar to me as I was looking through some VGM websites, and now we have some selections from the arcade version as well. What'd you think of this one, Tom?
Why do golf games have such amazing soundtracks?
Right?
Like, what is it about golf?
It's, I think it was a genre that maybe didn't get a lot of love back when these games were like new, but I think as adults now, or as more mature VGM fans, we're kind of falling in love with them all over again.
Yeah, like the golf game was your dad's game. It wasn't your game.
Right.
Not my dad's game. My dad didn't believe in playing video games, but...
But I think, yeah, as our musical palettes mature, I think we're catching up to where the golf composers were, you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's probably true. My first episode is actually all about golf games, and because golf games have such great soundtracks, and I really appreciate this. This is so cool. Thanks, Ed.
You're welcome. I thought you'd enjoy it. I took a listen to, some of the selections you picked for the show, and I was like, yeah, I think this matches up with Tom's taste, so let's throw it in there and have some fun with it.
I am all about Dynamic Country Club. I'm gonna have to go get me a membership.
Yeah, you know what? The golf game itself isn't that bad either. It's it kind of feels like a Genesis game, but of course moves in 3D, but it's a little bit faster than like some of the PGA Tour games that you would get on the Genesis. I think the hardware's a little more powerful. So, but again, it's very basic. You've got your sprite golfer, you've got your power meters, you can choose how your feet align with it. It might be a little bit deeper than actually some of the home console versions of golf back in the day.
It certainly sounds deeper than Neo Turf Masters. And I say that actually with a lot of reverence for Neo Turf Masters. I love Neo Turf Masters. It's my favorite golf game because it's so simple.
Agreed. Yeah, no, Neo Turf Masters was amazing, and I think it's only second to Hot Shots Golf for me. So, like, the arcade golf games are where it's at, I guess, for you and I.
At least musically, yeah. I don't think I've ever enjoyed a round of Golden Tea in my life.
Oh, man, we used to go to a bar, like, when I was in my early 20s. My buddy Steve and I would just spend the entire night at this Golden Tea machine. And just our literal, like, because it had the spinny ball where you have to spin it upward to hit. Yeah. We would used to slam it with the palms of our hands to, like, get the ball to fly as far as possible. And I used to have bruises on my palms from playing Golden Tea literally all night long.
So, I can believe that. I can believe that.
The only time I've ever been physically injured by an arcade game, and it was golf of all things. But yeah, Dynamic Country Club is fun. It's got a good soundtrack. It runs, again, on the YM2151 sound chip, which, like I said at the beginning of the show, so many arcade machines, whether they were Sega, Taito, whatever you have, like the 2151 was a very capable chip that was evidently very cost-effective to produce and to purchase, so they threw it into all sorts of arcade games, including the SharpX 68000 as well. And this ran on System 24 hardware, which was it was a little bit before the System 32 chip, so it had some rudimentary like scaling in there, but was more akin to like a Genesis, I guess, than the System 32, which I guess you could equate more to like a Sega 32X or something. Yeah,
the 24 sound seems like it was like the step up from the original System 16 and the superscaler stuff.
Exactly. Yep, they would just go by 8s for every iteration of their new arcade hardware.
There's probably like a processor bit reason for that. Like I've always assumed that the System 16 was just a 16-bit processor, and this was a 24-bit processor, and the 32 was a 32-bit processor. But I could be wrong.
You could. That might be right. I don't really know of any 24-bit processors out there, though.
I feel like the Neo Geo has a 24-bit processor.
It's commonly known as a 24-bit system, only because it's like more than 6. Like the public perception of it is more than 16-bit, but less than 32-bit. So they kind of like say, oh, we'll just call it 24-bit.
Yeah, you just put it in the middle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think it had a combination of 16-bit and 32-bit chips in there, which I guess maybe you can average out to 24.
Yeah, see, you just average it out. That's how computers work.
Yeah.
You just average everything out and it's fine.
Sure. You just shove it all in a box and rattle it around, and hopefully they connect together. And
that's how I built my custom PC, like back in the day. I haven't built one for a long time, but when I did build one, I just throw a bunch of parts in a box and shake it till I had something work.
According to my kids, that's what I do. So when I make their computers. Anyhow, yeah, so Dynamic Country Club, maybe not the best golf game out there, but definitely has some really cool music worth checking out.
Yeah, this is a soundtrack I gotta listen to
Yeah,
now.
FM golf jams are hidden troves. If you have not been a listener to VGM Jukebox or any of those podcasts that kind of extol the virtues of golf game music, then do yourself a favor and go check some out, because they are a lot of fun. I did a episode with Justin from XVGM Radio on the Mario Golf series. So listeners, if you're interested in more golf music, you can go back and check that one out. That was a lot of Motoi Sakuraba and some classic Nintendo composers doing the earlier games, so totally worth checking that one out as well.
Golf.
Let's move on to... this is your last one of the show, and one that we've kind of been alluding to as we built up to it. So what you got for us now?
All right, this is Chapter 13, 23, 43 from Spider-Man the Video Game, composed once again by Katsuhiro Hayashi and Kazuhiko Nagai. Yeah, let's go. That was Chapter 13, 23, and 43 from Spider-Man the Video Game, composed by Katsuhiro Hayashi, and Kazuhiko Nagai also worked on this soundtrack.
A lot of repeat offenders this time around.
Yeah, that's just how this works. Sega only had so many arcade composers.
And especially over the years, I mean, we're talking probably a span of, 1986 to 1992 here? That's a good 6 years or so where a lot of these composers were just cranking out these amazing tunes for these arcade games.
Yeah, they were. It probably helps that arcade games weren't very long. So, you didn't have, this whole soundtrack is maybe, 20 minutes. No, actually it says, it's got it down here on VGM Rips that we're looking at. The total length of the soundtrack is 16 minutes, 23 seconds, if you include the loops.
Right. So you're really looking at about, approximately 8 minutes worth of music.
Yeah.
Which is fine because, again, arcades, especially, at least in North American arcades, the music would either be turned all the way down or it would be up, but it would be drowned out by all the other stuff going on around it. So music was just not easy to hear.
Arcades as a platform are underappreciated for VGM for exactly that reason.
Yeah.
Everybody remembers sitting on their floor in front of their TV, bopping out to the Mega Man 2 soundtrack on their NES or whatever it was, but not very many people remember all of the music from a lot of arcade cabinets. Maybe there's kind of the Ninja Turtles cabinet, because that one got turned up because it used the motif from the Ninja Turtles cartoon show.
Right.
And there's Outrun, because there's Outrun.
Of course.
But this one, nobody knows Spider-Man's soundtrack.
No, for sure. And this has a really unique soundtrack too, because I think it uses a lot of experimentation with time signatures and just some really interesting note runs. We were talking while we were listening to it, and the soundtrack doesn't grab me so much, but I'm wondering what you like about this particular track that you chose.
I like it. It sounds like Radmobile, which is also a soundtrack I really like. It doesn't really sound like Spider-Man, I'll admit it, but it just has such a cool feel to it. It does have a feeling of danger, which is a thing that happens when you're Spider-Man, because Spider-Man's always fighting people who can beat the crap out of him and, nearly kill him. He's not Superman, who's, fighting people and, you throw a building at Superman and Superman's like, Is that all you got?
Right.
You just got this building? Spider-Man's like, oh my god, I got a building thrown at me, I'm dead now.
Yeah, or he's going to be able to dodge it, but then he's going to have to also try to rescue all the people that were in the building at the same time.
Yeah, like one of the defining Spider-Man bits is from, it's one of the early comics. I think it's John Romita Sr. drawing it. It's like Spider-Man, and he's crushed under this load of debris, and he just has to talk himself into being strong enough to get out from under the pile of rubble so that he can go save Aunt May and I think Mary Jane. And I'm clearly not doing this justice, but
no, I mean he's a superhero with flaws, and I think that's good because this game kind of plays on that because it's a beat 'em up, but then it's also kind of a side-scrolling platformer / shoot 'em up kind of a game. Maybe more like a run and gun than a shoot 'em up.
Yeah, this is kind of like Captain America and the Avengers, where it was willing to play in between those genres. Like most of Captain America and the Avengers, the Data East 4-player cabinet is a side-scrolling beat 'em up, but then there's a couple stages that are side-scrolling shooter,
right?
Just for no reason.
Yeah, just to vary the the action. I think to keep the player interested and pumping quarters in. But the really cool thing about Spider-Man game and the System 32, remember we were talking a little bit about the scaling capabilities of it when we were talking about Arabian Fight and how the characters got bigger and smaller. This would scale the entire screen. So you and Black Cat would be, walking down an alley in a standard, Final Fight style beat 'em up format, kicking and punching these enemies, and then the whole screen would zoom out until you were the size of a guy that's like, Bill Reiser from Contra.
Yeah.
And then you'd be jumping on these platforms and shooting web balls at all these enemies, and it suddenly like seamlessly just turns into this run and gun game. And it'll go back and forth depending on whether you're fighting bosses or what have you, and it's just a really, really cool effect.
It is. It's such a cool sense of like scale, and suddenly there you are in the city, and oh my god, you're in the city and you're on a building. Oh wow, it's a building. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and this being in New York City and the graphics had kind of this cel-shaded comic book style.
They did,
with kind of like flat shaded textures. It was just so cool. I remember playing it in the arcade and being blown away. And just thinking to myself, I'm like, there isn't any home console out there that's going to be able to do this justice because of this kind of seamless scaling they've got going on.
Which is probably why it never received a home release.
Exactly. And, the Saturn might have been able to do it, but we never saw that happen. I did want to mention that you talked about the music being kind of similar to Radmobile, and that's because Kazuhiko Nagai also wrote the music for Radmobile, so you've got a composer in common there. So I'm sure some of those tunes that remind you of Radmobile definitely were by him.
Yeah, and this is also another System 32 game. So, same sound chips, same composer, it's probably going to sound the same.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe he just had something left over from Radmobile, and he was like, well, this really doesn't work for driving, but Spider-Man is all about this.
Yeah, exactly. And then they're working with the same sound hardware as well, the dual YM 3438s and that Rico sampler. So lots of power behind this. I remember the enemies screaming like in a really high-pitched voice on this game. I don't remember who the enemies were, but they looked kind of like foot soldiers.
Yeah,
from the Ninja Turtles.
Just all these generic foot soldiers, and and then also like you have real Spider-Man villains like Venom and Scorpion.
Right, but the grunt enemies would kind of like go pew 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 whenever you punched them. It was a very, very bizarre sounding game. Wasn't quite sure what to make of it. But yeah, this one is if you've got MAME and you haven't played it, that's really the only way you can unless you find an arcade cabinet somewhere. Definitely check it out. It's still impressive today, that visual scaling, especially for a game that came out in like 1991. The effects and the graphics are well ahead of its time. Really, really impressed me when I was a kid. All right, are we ready to move on to our last track of the night?
I think we are ready, and I'm pretty sure this is Let's Go Away from Daytona, USA. Isn't that right?
Please stop. No. Yeah, I should mention that you trolled me a little bit when I gave you the Google document to start putting our show together, and you just did 3 tracks and they were all from Daytona, USA, and
It's such a great soundtrack.
I guess my distaste for it is becoming a meme at this point. No, but this is a song that's from a completely different game, very different kind of game too. This is BGM 2 from Scramble Spirits. This is an overhead shooter that came out in the arcades in 1998 and was composed again by Toru Nakabayashi and Yasuhiro Kawakami. Be right back.
Daytona.
All right, our final track of the evening, that was BGM 2 from Scramble Spirits, released in the arcade in 1988, composed by Toru Nakabayashi and Yasuhiro Kawakami. Funky track. I think we've really brought the funk and the jazz this evening. I just think FM music really excels in that genre, and this is really no exception. It's got two distinct parts. I think the B section towards the end is a little more golf-like, a little bit, whereas the front is kind of like that funky kind of groove. What'd you think of this one?
That front section sounds like I should be playing a side-scrolling brawler where I'm walking through a 1940s street or maybe a 1980s street and I'm punching bad guys. I love it. It doesn't sound like a shooter, but I love it.
Yeah. I got kind of like a James Brown, maybe like a late 60s, early 70s vibe from that.
Yeah. Like a blaxploitation movie.
Yeah, basically, exactly. Yeah, you get some like Quentin Tarantino vibes going on there.
Yeah.
It's a really simple game. I mean, it's just an overhead shoot 'em up. You're a biplane, so I guess it does have that kind of that time period feel for the music.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of apes a little bit on like the 1942 series, which listeners of the show will be very familiar with, considering I focused on that quite a bit on one show.
I mean, if you're going to steal from a game, 1942 is a quality pick. And also, like, those games are so nuts by the time you get, like, past 1943. Like, 44 and 40X are really bonkers.
Yeah, once you get into, like, the CPS2 versions of the game and everything, they start getting, like, more sci-fi than they do actually historically accurate planes and stuff.
I mean, you got to go somewhere, and, you know...
Yeah.
World War II only lasted for so long, so what do? You take the fight to space.
We just pretend that World War II never ended, and technology kept increasing around it. So this might fit into somewhere along there. I haven't really... This is probably the game I've played the least. I just watched some video footage of it, and I was like, yeah, I get the gist. There's really not too much to chat about in terms of the game.
I've never played this game at all.
Yeah, it's, you know, like I said, if you're going to play like a game like this, you may as well stick with like the 1942 series.
Yeah, I mean, I think I have played it, despite the fact that I haven't played it.
Exactly. Yeah, you played one, you've played them all.
Yeah, it's like, you know, I've played Street Fighter 2, so I've also played Fighter's History.
Yep. The newcomer composer, Yasuhiro Kawakami, was a much earlier Sega employee, so worked on stuff like Shinobi, Crackdown, Cyber Police, eSWAT. Didn't really make it past like the System 24 era, which is what this game was built on. So
Shinobi almost made it onto the playlist for tonight. Thought very seriously about including a Shinobi track or two. I like Shinobi.
It's got some great stuff too. I think, well, personally, I'd like to feature the really obscure stuff, but I guess VGM podcasts probably haven't played a lot of the arcade Shinobi. We probably get a lot of like the Genesis Shinobi.
Yeah, you play the Genesis the Genesis Shinobi songs are kind of the tracks that people know, especially since I think it's Shinobi 2 that's Yuzo Koshiro, but the original arcade Shinobi has an amazing soundtrack. That soundtrack is stone cold bangers.
Yeah, and same composer as this. So if you dig this, then and you haven't checked out Shinobi, definitely go check that one out as well. But yeah, so I feel like, on the whole, there wasn't a single like filler track in this whole episode. I think everyone was just like, damn, that was really good. Let's hear more. I really appreciate you bringing your A game with these tracks, Tom. Thank you so much. And it was a blast hanging out with you and talking about this stuff.
It was cool. Thank you for having me. Thanks for letting me come on the show. And I'm glad I got to talk about cool old Sega arcade games with somebody. I like those old arcade games. Those are freaking cool. I wish arcades were still a thing and not just full of Fast and Furious driving racer games and ticket machines and the cool the Space Invaders ticket machine, the world's largest Space Invaders thing. That one's kind of cool, but
yeah,
that's like the only cool arcade game I've seen since Star Wars Battle Pod, and that was the first one I'd seen in years. It's sad. It's
kind of a shame. I do, I like the arcade racing games, but they don't really have the same charm. One of the ways I've kind of been keeping the arcade spirit alive is I have a Mister. I don't know if you've heard of them, but it's like how do I explain it? It's a board that uses an FPGA chip, so it basically simulates all of the circuitry of an arcade machine in a home console kind of a deal.
Oh, okay.
And it runs off of the same ROMs that MAME would use. But the nice thing is, because the timing is so accurate and the simulation, it's not even really emulation, it's the simulation of the games are so accurate that you could hook it up to your TV and basically like use it like it's an arcade monitor. So I have an arcade stick and a CRT monitor, and I'll throw these arcade games on it and stand in front of the TV with the arcade stick, and it really gives you like a very good interpretation of what playing the actual arcade unit would be like, instead of like, sitting at your computer desk and playing it on MAME.
Yeah.
So I've been really kind of getting into that, and they're still developing new cores or systems for this Mister unit. And so, as they're coming out, I've been like introducing myself to the new batches of arcade games and playing a lot of stuff I haven't played before. So I've been probably more into arcade stuff now than I ever have been, just because I've got so much more of an authentic way to kind of experience these games. It's really breathing new life into it.
Yeah, well, it's not like you got to own an arcade as a kid, and
it was always my dream, but it never happened.
Oh, mine too. Like, once MAME cabinets became a thing, I was like, I have to have one.
Yep.
And I built one, and it's so cool. You do get to live the dream. I've got this personal theory that the whole purpose of life is to like become this person who would be the envy of your 12-year-old self, in like the good way, not in the bad way.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think I'm kind of there. I mean, I've wanted an arcade cabinet forever too, and it's just been a matter of convincing my wife to have the space for it.
Yeah.
And the money for it.
Having the space for it is hard. Like, I have one. I actually have one. I have one of the big, like, 32-inch monitor arcade cabinets in my basement.
Ooh, nice.
It's a cool thing to own. Like, I need to fix it up and get it running again, but it's still cool to own. Like, I'm glad even if I like sell it tomorrow to somebody, I'm still glad that I bought it because of what it meant.
Right. And at least you know that your 12-year-old self would be like, oh my God, I can't believe we did it.
Yeah.
Bucket list crossed off. My wife told me that her dad used to have one of those Ivan Iron Man Stewart Super Sprint arcade cabinets, the 4-player one with the steering wheel.
Yeah.
He used to have it in his garage forever, and ended up getting rid of it or selling it or something before I met her. But I was like, if he still had that, I would have convinced him to bring it to my house.
Yeah, Off-Road was such a cool game.
Yeah. Great music on that one, too. I think Tim Follin actually did the Super Nintendo version of the soundtrack. But yeah, bringing the arcade experience home has been kind of a goal of mine for a long time. And I think I'm probably as close as I can realistically get without winning the lottery and or moving to a house with a specific dedicated arcade section in it.
Yeah, every once in a while you'll see something on Instagram from like some meetup that's in some dude's garage where he's got like 25 arcade cabinets just gathered there, and they're like, 50 people packed in like Lego bricks sweating on each other because that's what it was like.
Right, exactly. Putting the quarter up on the screen for your next round of Street Fighter 2 and having these kind of unspoken arcade rules, I think, was one of the coolest parts about it, because you felt like you were part of the inside arcade crowd. So much fun. So, Tom, on your show, where can we find you on the web? Anything coming up that you want to give us a little hint about?
You can find all of my links at linktr.ee/Shujin Academy. That's spelled Shujin, and then Academy spelled the normal way, because no one really gets confused about how to spell Academy. Shujin Academy VGM Club, my show, is on Apple and Spotify and lots of other places. If you want to follow me on Tumblr, I'm Shujin Academy VGM Club. On Mastodon, I'm Shujin Academy VGM Club at mastodon.coffee. I have a Twitter, it's Shujin VGM Club. I don't really use it for anything except announcing new episodes of the show. I do have a YouTube channel. You can go look up Shujin Academy VGM Club on YouTube and find it there. And I have an Instagram, which is also Shujin Academy VGM Club. So Shujin Academy VGM Club, lots of socials, also on Facebook. You can find me, subscribe to me. If you like the podcast, give it a 5-star review. If you don't like the podcast, also give it a 5-star review. Fool your enemies.
Absolutely. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer.
It's like how you sleep with a copy of the Daytona USA soundtrack under your pillow. Right, Ed?
Oh, God. Yes. It actually keeps the actual game away from me.
It keeps all the nightmares away, because nothing could be more fearful for you than that soundtrack.
Yes. It's my alarm clock. Daytona! Oh, goodness gracious. So anyways, I will have links to all of Shujin VGM Academy stuff in the show notes for this podcast, so please take a look at thevgembassy.com. You'll see that. You'll see our playlist. You'll see all of our social medias. You can hit up Twitter. We're at the VGMbassy. You can hit the Discord link on our website and join our amazing Discord, which is really been the hub of VGMbassy activity, I guess you could say. I'm on Twitter, but again, kind of like you, I just use it to pretty much announce shows and kind of retweet some cool VGM related stuff. But Discord is
I'm really active on the Discord.
Yeah.
Not on my Discord. I don't have a Discord. I'm just active on your Discord. So if you want to talk to Professor Tom, come to the VGMbassy Discord.
Yeah, absolutely. Come and hang out. We share video game music. We talk about games and movies, and it's just a bunch of really cool people hanging out. Some of us do like a Wordle puzzle every morning, and we kind of compare our scores and joke about that. So it's a lot of fun. It's a great scene to hang out in. We hope to see you there. Please go visit my Patreon page at patreon.com/thevgembassy. You can take a look at the tiers and find out how you can support the show and help me kind of offset some of the costs for hosting and all the equipment and stuff, and find out ways that you can participate in the show as well. Alternating shows of the VGMbassy is another show called Embassy Exclusive, in which me and a couple of buddies, Joe and Todd, hang out, talk about video game topics. And a lot of times we will present the topics to our Discordians and let them chime in and then read their responses on the air and kind of chat about them as well. And I also like to thank all of my Patreon patrons at the end of every show, starting with our tourist tier, Cameron Childs, and the Phantomire, our VG Emissary tier, Chris Murray, Chris Myers, Gannon11, Keyglyph, Kyle Kroll, the Dyad, the Last Rican, and you, Professor Tom. Thank you very, very much.
Yay!
Our audio attaché members, Cameron Worma, Carlos from the Heroes 3 podcast, and Scott McElhone, and our special agent tier, Ryan Steele. All right, so we will be back. Next month would be the month of June, so that means Masters of VGM month.
Ooh, yeah.
If all goes well, and I think it should, the Dyad will be joining me for that one, so we'll be presenting 4 of our favorite underrated composers, I think, is going to be the theme for this year. So we'll be sharing some great tunes.
Yeah, underrated composers and up-and-coming composers. I still got to find... I knew one immediately, but I've still got at least a couple other. I've still got to do at least 2 more to think of.
Cool. Well, I'm looking forward to listening to your show for sure. And you can head over to mastersofvgm.com or follow Masters of VGM on Twitter to get more information about the different shows participating. And it's going to be basically a conglomerate of all the shows participating on that website. And so you can check them all out there. Last year was a blast, so I'm really looking forward to doing it again this year.
It was.
All right, so we will see you then. Everyone stay cool, stay safe, keep listening to awesome VGM. Thanks again for hanging out with me, Tom.
Thank you for having me.
Good night, everyone.